Hi everyone, this is Shannon Williams from Rancher Labs, and welcome to our March online meetup. We got a big crowd here today, so we should have a great conversation as always. I am, as usual, joined by my co-founder, Darren Shepard, here at Rancher. Darren will be diving into Rancher today and some demos and answering a lot of your technical questions. I'm Shannon, by the way. I'm the head of our marketing and sales organization here at Rancher and one of the founders. And yeah, Darren, you want to say hi?
Well, hi, excited to be here.
If you guys haven't attended one of these before, Darren and I host this every month. It's a standing meetup. We change topics. We do a lot of different things with these. They're all recorded then and put up on YouTube. So if you miss one or miss this content, you can always come back and see it again later on. We're really excited today to be joined by some guests. Srdjan, Bosckovic, and Don Olmstead from Sony PlayStation Network are going to be presenting today. You guys want to say hello?
Don is still not here, so it's only Srdjan right now for a moment, but he's coming soon.
Okay, well, when Don gets here, we'll say hi to him. You guys will be going on a little bit later, so no big deal. And Srdjan and Don are going to give us a presentation about how they're using Rancher. They're going to talk a little bit especially about the catalog, because they've really implemented the catalog as a key component in how they release software and get it in the hands of their developers. It should be really interesting. And as always, you know, the whole point of this event is it's a meetup. It's not a webinar. It's not a marketing event. This is meant to be a hands-on technical discussion about topics that are interesting to operations teams, people that are running Rancher, that are using this technology. They're trying to figure out how to roll it out in their organization. And so, like, you know, Srdjan and Don today, when they present, they're gonna have a couple slides, but they're also gonna demo some of the stuff they're doing. Obviously, Darren and I every month, the whole point of our work is demoing new things, showing off new stuff. So it should be a lot of fun, and because it's a meetup, we do things a little differently than some typical sort of marketing webinars. The event today doesn't really have a fixed endpoint. We start, we cover topics. We really won't leave until your questions are answered. So questions are always welcome. The way we handle questions here is you post them in the questions tab. And if you post a question, I'll respond. And most of the time, unless you say something like please don't post this to everyone, I'll respond and share it with the whole group so that people can see the questions coming in and see the responses, and we can share our discussion there. There's no bad questions in this. You know, people range in experience. Some people have been using Rancher for 15 months. You know, some people have literally just picked it up. Some people are new to Docker. Some people. Don't be embarrassed. Ask your question. If your question is a really newbie question, I may just respond to you personally and back. And so don't feel stressed about anything. Just ask your questions, and we'll answer them as best we can. As always, this is all about demoing. We really try to do stuff live, and we don't record demos. We do them live. We show you what stuff is. A lot of times we show you things that are coming, that are new, that are maybe not even fully baked. So sometimes stuff breaks. Please be patient. We'll go through it as fast as we can, and often we've got, you know, backup staged so we can switch to another environment where maybe something's already finished loading. But by and large, we try to keep it moving reasonably quickly, but it is live stuff, so bear with us if stuff goes down. There's an awesome community of people who attend these meetups, and you know, at some point we'd love to do a live one and get to know all of you in person and go drink beers. But for now, the way we see each other is on Twitter. So if you are joining the meetup, please join the conversation on Twitter as well. You can just hashtag Rancher Meetup to your post a picture of yourself and what you're doing as you watch the meetup, and we'll probably grab it and stick it up here on our wall of people that have posted these things. So we'd love to see you all and get to know some of you and what you look like, what you do, what you're doing while you watch these meetups every month. Just make sure you use the hashtag Rancher Meetup. It's one word. It's nice and long. It's nice and long, so yeah, it shouldn't be too hard to remember. So this month, I mentioned in the email we sent out that we might be doing a bit of a special contest. And as many of you know, it's a big month for us. We released Rancher 1.0 this week. So Rancher 1.0 is now out and available, and thank you to all of you who've been pinging us with thanks and congratulations. It is as every open source project is, it is a labor of love from so many people who have put effort and work into Rancher to make it what it is and make it as successful as it's become. One of the cool things that we were able to do is, in the lead up to 1.0, is we reached out to some friends and people we knew that were big users of Rancher, and we asked them to just give us quotes about how they were using Rancher, what they were doing, why they liked it, why they chose to use it to help their organization manage containers better. And as part of that, they've shared quotes which we have put on the homepage of the website, and it's kind of a scrolling thing. You can flip through it. I just pulled up a couple of them, but it's very cool. You can just go in if you want to read the rest. Go to our homepage, and you'll see all sorts of cool quotes from people that are sharing sort of their story about how they're using Rancher. And we'd love to have more up here. Our goal is to have this whole thing as everything we do in Git, so anybody can post a cool quote, and we can sort of approve it and stick it up here, and you can sort of tell the world why and how you're using Rancher and why it works so well for you. But to kind of continue on that, what we're going to do for the contest this month is, because we have our friends from PlayStation here, we're actually going to give out a PS4 to anyone, or to the winner of anyone who registers by providing a new quote for our page. So the way to participate is you send an email that includes your quote and your name and your company name to Shannon@rancher.com, and please stick the subject PlayStation in there so we don't forget. And in there, anyone who submits a quote will be entered into the contest. And if you can't, get your company approval, you can put it in your name and put your own name as a consulting company. It doesn't really matter. Just put yourself in, send it over. I can't promise everything will end up on the website, but send it all over, and you'll be automatically entered. We're going to randomly pick someone as a winner on this Friday. So do that, and maybe you'll be walking away with an amazing PS4 to delight your family. Okay, now on to the good stuff. What are we covering today? The agenda is we're going to talk about containers as a service and Rancher 1.0, the work we've been doing. So the whole focus of the session today, though, is really, it's kind of the culmination of 9 months of beta, and before that, 6-8 months of alpha work that's gone into building Rancher as a container services platform. And then, so I'll talk a little bit about that, but really focus on why people are building this, what their value they're looking to gather from it. And then Darren is going to jump in and demo this. He's going to show you some of the really cool new stuff in 1.0. He'll talk through, how we're doing HA and Swarm and Kubernetes and a few things. And so he'll demo it and give you some ideas of what's new, and also, kind of more focus on just sort of using these new systems within Rancher environment. Then we're going to switch over to Srdjan, who's going to talk about how they improve the development infrastructure and efficiency using Rancher and the Rancher catalog. And then finally, Don is, Don is going to do, a demo of how they built their private catalog. And then finally, Darren's just going to go through a little bit about, the releases, the last few releases, maybe talk a little bit about what's coming next, how we're going to be numbering releases in the project, things like that at the end. So that's the agenda. Hopefully, we'll have lots of questions along the way. And once we, oh my goodness, I just got the note that maybe you couldn't see my desktop. Has anyone not been seeing my desktop this whole time? I've been talking and talking and talking, and no one's seen my desktop. I'm so sorry. Okay, I apologize. Hopefully everyone has been seeing all the stuff I've been talking about. I completely messed this up. Anyways, I forgot to click the share your desktop button. So this is what I was saying. So join the conversation on Twitter. That's what we're talking about. This is the contest. These are the kind of quotes we have on the website. This is the PS4 that you're going to win because you're going to provide a quote. And here's the agenda we're going through. Whew, good thing I figured it out before we jumped into the real content. All right, guys, sorry about that. Now, on to the good stuff. So really quickly, because sometimes there's a bit of confusion about what we're talking about here. Rancher Labs is a company. We build Rancher and Rancher OS, so two products. Rancher is the platform for building a container service. We're mostly going to be talking about that today. Rancher OS is a tiny little Linux distribution that you use to run Docker. The two things are really independent. So if you use Rancher OS, you don't need to use Rancher. If you use Rancher, you don't need to use Rancher OS. And today we're going to be talking about Rancher, which is what just went to 1.0. Okay, so like I said, it's been a big month for us. The the announcement of 1.0 happened yesterday, and we are really excited to have so many people trying it out, getting involved in the community, and it has very much been something that that we worked on for a long time. So it's a big celebration. We're really excited to have reached this milestone. But as we've kind of worked through this, the thing that really has stood out is so many people that we work with as users have really talked about why they're using Rancher. Like why actually put something like this in place, and why containers? And I think one of my favorite responses to that question came from the chief software architect at Shutterfly. He said, the point of this is not containerization. Because containerization itself is not the goal. The goal is we need to get to this agile, continuous delivery platform. Like we need to get to a point where we can release software consistently, we can push this out and make change very quickly. And containers help us get there. And that's the real reason that this whole idea of a container service makes so much sense, is that if containers if you can access all of this with containers, you can deploy and manage your platforms much easier. So Docker at its core is really doing two things in organizations. There's two things that users are seeing with Docker. The first is they're able to improve the speed and reliability of their software development organization. So what that means is that by using containers, developers are able to develop quicker. They're able to share their code. They're able to spin up environments locally that look like what they would run in production. They're able to build quicker. They're able to deploy test environments and run unit tests locally very quickly. So a lot of what Docker makes sense for is developers. It just makes the development process dramatically easier because you're now dealing with these immutable objects that can be deployed anywhere. But there is a second half of that, which is that containers also really are ideal for operations. They are as a packaging format, are this consistent packaging format that makes it easy to deploy your containers. They help reduce costs dramatically. I mean, one of the things when we were asking for quotes from people, we kept hearing was, well, I've cut my Amazon bill by 50% because instead of spinning up a VM every time I need something, I'm able to now run lots of services across the same hosts and get bigger hosts, but use a lot less of them and save a lot of money. So fundamentally, these are the reasons people are building their containers. They're looking to improve the speed and reliability of their software development, and they're trying to deploy that better and operate it more reliably and operate it more efficiently. The idea of containers as a service is one that we've been talking about container clouds and container services, and I think containers as a service may end up being what we call this layer of technology. It's still not quite sure because people call it so many different things: container management, container orchestration. But the idea of container service makes a lot of sense to me because when we hear users talk about what they want to get to with the platform, it's really this trying to find a balance between the needs of the development teams and the DevOps teams and the needs of sort of the central IT organization that wants to sort of manage and have visibility into what's happening. You can imagine that as users begin to consume containers, the idea of central control becomes pretty important. These things, if you thought VMs were going to sprawl, containers sprawl in a way that's just massively more complex. And so really at the core of the idea of a container as a service platform is to deliver self-service access to users, that they can spin up containers, spin up container clusters very easily. They can use the system directly as you would almost like a cloud, very hands-on, very obvious way to manage the system. But from a developer perspective, the key is flexibility. Flexibility with where I can run it. Can I run it locally? Can I run it in the cloud? Can I run it in bare metal servers? But also, how I run it. Well, I need to run this, but I'm a Kubernetes user and I prefer Kubernetes, or my vendor gave me a Kubernetes package and I know there's a really good template for what I'm trying to do in Kubernetes, so I want to deploy a Kubernetes cluster and manage it that way. Or maybe, instead I really love Docker and the native Docker UI, so I want to use Swarm. So the idea of sort of flexibility comes into any platform. The challenge always is providing something as a central service that actually meets the needs of a broad set of users. So that's sort of the requirement from the developer perspective. The requirement from the operator's perspective, the central services provider perspective is, that's all great, I need to make you happy, but I also need to make my auditors happy, and I need to have cost controls and access controls and audit logging and policy management that says what you get and how you get it and when you're allowed to provision things, so that I can be sure that what's getting put into production or getting put onto our servers has gone through some level of validation. So that's really the whole point of containers as a service, to match these two sides together into something that can be used by everyone and that's multi-tenant enough that every team can come in and deploy something. So what we've tried to focus on is what is this idea then of a container service? A container service takes resources in the form of Linux machines, either virtual or physical, from any cloud, any host, any any virtual machine from VMware. I mean, anywhere that you can get Linux can be the resource pool that you use to run your containers. But this container service sort of sits between there and delivers a broad set of functionality. When we first started working on this 18 months ago, one of the things we were doing as a user, and as we talked to developers, we heard over and over, is just building out a Docker management environment, or building out a Docker environment alone, just a single one, was a pretty massive undertaking. I mean, you dealt with tons of different projects that had to be put together to deal with the infrastructure side of running containers, the networking, the storage, as well as the actual container management itself, the engine, the registry, the access control policy, the monitoring solutions, the scheduling pieces. So building a single environment was relatively challenging. Building an environment that would then support multiple environments wasn't really even an option at the time. We weren't even talking about that. But that's really what we tried to do with Rancher, was figure out how to build a single platform that would allow you to provide this as a service to your developers and teams. And one of the things we ran into in doing that is, initially, when we started the beta, our approach was to really, pick a line, sort of pick a set of tools, bring them together, sort of integrate them into a platform, and that would be our approach to running containers. And I think that was effective because it allowed you to actually run this stuff and get it deployed and have it work, but it also meant that it didn't really meet that level of flexibility that we were hoping to get to. So over the course of the beta, working with a lot of users and people, we've added in, as much as we can, a lot of flexibility so that users can pick what registry they want to use, what scheduler they want to use, what approach they want to use to access control or to monitoring. We've done some of that through the catalog. We've done some of that by extending Rancher, and there's more to come. I think we've solved some of these problems. There's more that we want to make pluggable. But the long-term goal is to make this platform, itself really pluggable for users, so that, as an experience, they can really choose from the tools that are out there and available, but do that in a way that's super simple. Click a button and you get it. Sort of the way we've done it with the orchestration frameworks. So if you think of Rancher now, the best way to think of it is sort of three fundamental layers of technology working together. You have a set of technology around infrastructure services, which deals with how to manage storage or how to deliver networking between the containers. And application services, which deal with things that are needed by the apps to run reliably, like a load balancing service or DNS service, a metadata service. There's a lot more here. You can imagine a database service and other things that could be useful for running applications reliably. But then on top of that, having a layer of orchestrators that could be chosen, that you could just choose to deploy. So today, with the 1.0 release, we introduced Swarm. About a month ago, we introduced Kubernetes. We had a meetup on that last month. And we've had Cattle for a long time, which is sort of the Rancher default orchestrator that we implemented when we first released Rancher into beta. Our goal, though, is to extend this further. I think we see what we believe and what we've been I think, seeing for some time is that there isn't going to be a single scheduler or framework that people use to run containers, just like there isn't one they use to write code or anything else, or just single database that meets all people's requirements. What we're seeing is there's use cases where Kubernetes is perfect. There's use cases where Swarm meets the requirements. There's use cases where Mesos might be a better choice. And so what we want to provide is a platform that makes deploying those things, a single click, 4 minutes, and it's up and running. And Rancher takes care of managing and upgrading and all of those containers, regardless of where you run them. And then on top of that, we implement this layer of enterprise management that includes the catalog, the APIs, the access control systems, the audit logs, all the visibility and control services, and we're really just getting started here. There's a lot that needs to be, so much more that can be added here in terms of more granular RBAC, more, powerful automation and controls, things like, price controls, where do you get your hosts, how do you choose where to deploy the infrastructure for a cluster, all sorts of things that people are looking for to define the policies that people use to access these container clusters. But that's really where we see this going, and it leads into Rancher being what makes Rancher. It's basically an open source platform anyone can use. It's easy, it's simple to use. It's enterprise grade in terms of how it manages security and access control and policy management. But most importantly, it runs identically everywhere. I mean, that's the real value of containers, is that your network, your storage, these services, they all are consistent. They work perfectly across the board, and we're able to support Swarm and Kubernetes, and hopefully in the future more schedulers. Make these things quite pluggable that can be deployed so that you can support Clocker and maybe support other platforms that come along over time. So the use case that we see containers as a service predominantly being used in is really your traditional DevOps pipeline. I mean, the vast majority of our community members and users, and what they're doing is they're basically they're using their CI systems and their code repositories to build and develop their code. They're pushing it up. They're then packaging it and putting it into a registry, and then Rancher is how they manage the infrastructure that it gets deployed on. So more than often than not, that means we're running on top of VMware or Amazon or Google or Azure, or maybe some bare metal hosts, and the environments you're doing testing and dev environments, production environments, are all running inside of your Rancher server. And that's where you deploy your code, that's how you upgrade your applications, that's how you actually operate the service. So that's really what I wanted to talk about in terms of the idea of containers as a service. I'm sorry again for not getting the video started right away, but hopefully everyone was able to see that. The next piece of today's meetup is always the better part, which is showing you this stuff in person, showing what's going on inside of the new Rancher 1.0. So I'm going to turn it over now to Darren, and he's going to go through setting up an environment, talk about some of the things that changed, and hopefully we'll be able to get everything working. So Darren, are you, let me see if I can make you the presenter. Are you ready to go? Oh, Darren, okay. Are you there? I can't, yes. There you go. I couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you fine.
All right. Yeah, I'm ready to go here. Okay, so let me close the button. So what I wanted to do was first demo the HA setup. So in Rancher, we've always had an HA setup, but it required setting up Zookeeper, Redis, and some other components, and honestly, it's quite difficult. And so, what we do as Rancher is we orchestrate containers and make these complex deployments simple. So we wanted to make the HA setup simple also. And so what we're rolling out with this 1.0 release is also the fully managed HA setup. So really, in terms of the kind of the components of the HA, nothing has really changed. We've hardened kind of that setup with Zookeeper and Redis, but what you're getting now is a fully managed setup. So if you've run Rancher today as like a single, just as a single server, typically what you would just do is just something like this, just Docker run Rancher, oops, 8080. So you just go and launch Rancher just as a single container, and that gives you a very simple setup. This gets Rancher up and running in a couple minutes. You can start adding hosts and deploying containers, and so the experience for this single server has been really quite simple. And so what we wanted to be able to do is allow users to easily move from this setup that they'll have to an HA setup. And so the way that we've done that is, imagine that I already have a single node setup running. So let me bring that up. Okay, so I already have this just this single node simple setup. I've been using it, deploying applications, everything looks great, but now I want to really move this into being highly available. So what we've done is we've added this tab here under admin for HA. And then so this screen here will essentially walk you through the whole setup. So the very first thing is you need to set up an external database. So when I just ran this command line, we're running MySQL embedded inside of there. So the first thing you're going to need to do is you really need to set up an external database. So the important thing to realize about Rancher is all of the state is kept in the database. There's various different components. We have like Zookeeper and Redis. None of those are stateful. The only state is in the database, and so that's what you need to be primarily concerned about when you're looking at like DR and HA and all that, is that you have a good database setup. So since if you deploy this as a single server, the database is running inside the container, so you're going to need to export out that database and move it over to something like RDS or Google SQL, or if you have your own self-hosted database setup. So we make that really easy. You can just click Export Database here, and this will export basically in MySQL dump. So whatever, Windows can't open that. But so basically, so we have now the dump. So what you do now is go over, import that into your database. So now you have your database set up. Okay, and we also have, there's instructions, we kind of help you a little bit with setting up a database. There's more instructions on docs.rancher.com. Okay, so once you have your database set up, so that's kind of like really the hardest part. Then the next is to generate this HA config script. Okay, so when you go and you set up a cluster, you have the choice of if you want 1, 3, or 5. So one host is really not HA at all, but some people still want to be able to set it up and test it. 3 hosts is really, basically, we need a quorum for things to continue to work. So if you have 3 hosts, you can lose 1. If you have 5 hosts, you can lose 2, and everything will still function fine. For this demo right now, I'm just going to do 1 host because it's faster. Okay, so once you do that, then you need to enter the host registration URL. This is a setting that we've always had in the admin section here, this host registration URL. What this is it's basically what's the public URL that hosts are going to hit, because you might put some friendly domain there, like my awesome site or something. So for here, I'm going to say, okay, demo is going to space. Okay. So this is going to be the URL of where the Rancher server is going to be running. So next is the certificate. So because we're going to set up SSL and we manage that for you. So you can either generate a self-signed certificate or you can upload a valid one. So this is very similar to our load balancer setup. You need to upload the private key certificate or and the cert chain, which is basically the CA. So for this, we're just going to go with just generate a self-signed cert. And then these are various ports that are going to be listening on the server. So when you set up an HA setup, you really need to dedicate a node to it. So you like to launch a VM or whatever it is, but the whole server is basically going to be dedicated to Rancher running there. And we're going to expose all these various ports that we need to talk across. But all of these ports, every single one of them are, they're not fully exposed out to the internet. We encrypt all the communication. So even though, like, if you're familiar with, let's say, deploying Redis, Redis has no encryption, and they also have a very simple, pretty weak password scheme. Like, you can just have one user. So basically what we do with Redis and Zookeeper is we run these over secure tunnels. So we still do need a public port on the host, but it is running on encrypted tunnels, so nobody can. People, if this was actually, if you put it on the internet, people wouldn't be able to just connect, directly to your Redis or Zookeeper. It's all still protected, but we do need the ports open on the host. So you can configure what all those are. So this is if you want. So this is obviously going to be the HTTPS that we're going to be running. HTTP you can turn off if you just don't want Rancher available at all on HTTP. There are some reasons why you might want to do this, which has to do with like proxy protocol and ELP and stuff like that. And then this one here is whether or not you want Swarm. So Swarm, we dedicate a port directly for Swarm. And I'll be demoing the Swarm stuff a little bit later, and I'll talk a little bit more how that works. But if you're, you're not going to do Swarm, you want to just do cattle or Kubernetes, you can also just disable that. Okay, so after we go through this, we just basically click this generate script, and it's going to generate this whole script for you here. Okay, so really, the UI here is just to help you through the process. What you really need is just this script. So for people who want to fully automate these things, or deploy this through like CloudFormation or Puppet or something like that, you can basically set up. All the script is doing is setting up a configuration file with a bunch of environment variables, and then setting up these certificates and whatnot. So if you wanted to just do this all 100% yourself, you can do it. So it's once we place this configuration in place, we just run this one Rancher container, which then bootstraps the whole process. Okay, so now once you have this script, basically what you just need to do is on each server where you're going to run Rancher, you just need to go and run this script. And you put as the parameter here as what's the Rancher server Docker image. Okay, so let me go to command line here, and I already downloaded the script here, so I have it. So basically, we can just run this Rancher HA script. Oops, sorry. Normally you would put Rancher server, but the image locally here is called test. But okay, so then you can just go, once you run that, you can tail this Rancher HA container, and it will tell you what it's doing. Okay, so basically what this did is it sets up, this launched a bunch of various containers, which includes cattle and Catalyst orchestration engine, Zookeeper, Redis, the encrypted tunnels, Go machine service, WebSocket proxy. So basically, it launched the whole thing. I already had all the images and everything cached here, so this went pretty fast. So once it runs, like I can show you Docker PS, we launched all these various containers to get that running. So now that I have this, let's see. Yes, this is the one. Okay. So I should be able to hit. Yeah. Okay. So normally when you go into Rancher, the very first time you come up, you're in an environment called default. So when I did this HA setup, basically what I've done is I created this. It creates a special environment called system management. So in here in system management, it creates one stack called management, and it also registers all the hosts of where this stuff is run. So if I had done a 3-node setup, there'd be 3 hosts here. So you can see here in this stack, here's all the various services. Let me switch to a different view so I can show you. Sorry, I keep flipping between browsers so much. Too much going on. That's the one. Yeah. Okay. So let me bring up this graph here. Okay. So this gives you an idea of what this just deployed. So basically, we deploy a load balancer, and we set up the SSL. So that's how I got the SSL working over here. And then so we have the load balancer, which then talks to the WebSocket proxy. Now, what WebSocket proxy is well, here, let me just clarify one thing. All of these components actually run in the one single container in like the single server setup. So even though like it looks like it's just kind of like one application, we actually are running like a lot of little microservices in there. We just kind of make it look like one container. But when we do this HA setup, we deploy everything as separate containers, and then we manage them all separately. So all these components are actually still in a regular like single node setup, but we just exploded it out. But oops, sorry, didn't click there. So the WebSocket proxy, what that is oh gosh, sorry. The WebSocket proxy creates a tunnel from the host to the management plane. And this is how we deal with a lot of like, how we kind of do secure communication to the host. Because when you're setting up an environment, if you have inbound connections to your host, like where the Docker containers are running, it's often really hard to set up firewall rules and whatnot to get inbound connections. So instead what we do is we make sure all the connections from the host are going outbound. So they go outbound to the control plane, and then we create this, they talk to the WebSocket proxy, which then creates a secure tunnel back to the host. So this allows us to go through the WebSocket proxy to get to the host. And this is how, we do things like, even though like the nodes might be behind some firewall, I can still go and, oops, I go to like the container. First one, here's a container. I can go and execute the shell. Oh shoot, okay, that's gonna work. If I go and execute shell, it will go through that WebSocket proxy. Let's go back to the graph here. Okay, so once, so as I was saying before, we have a load balance, talks to WebSocket proxy, which then talks to Cattle. Cattle is actually our core orchestration engine. It kind of powers all of Rancher. Then we have these two other components out here, Rancher Compose Executor, which is basically handles all of the stack management, like when you create stacks and delete stacks, it actually goes to this Rancher Compose Executor. Go Machine service here, this does the Docker machine integration. Okay, so then down below we have Cattle, which then talks to Zookeeper. You can see we have all these tunnels, which basically kind of route back and forth between Zookeeper and the tunnel. And then we have Redis too. And let me just talk a little bit of how we use Zookeeper and Redis, because we run these things completely ephemeral. They have like very narrow use cases that we use them for. Redis we use as basically an event bus. We use the PubSub capability in Redis. It's extremely fast and very lightweight. It takes up a couple megabytes of memory. Zookeeper we use it as a distributed lock manager. But since we purely use it for locks that are ephemeral, we don't actually persist anything to disk. Zookeeper never actually touches the disk. And when we lose a Zookeeper node, it just actually rebuilds completely from scratch because there's no persistent state in it. Okay. Let's see. So that's like the full HA setup for Rancher. I'll stop here. I imagine there might be some questions before I get into the demo of the new Swarm environment.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of questions. You were on a roll, so I didn't want to stop you for a minute there. But let me see if I can bang through these questions quickly. So so the first question was for the HA setup. Does it only support Zookeeper, or could they use something else?
No, so it's only Zookeeper. So this is why we made it fully managed ourselves, because people look at like running like Zookeeper as somewhat like of a burden. But the way we run Zookeeper, it's actually really, really simple because it's purely ephemeral. But the way we use it as a distributed lock manager actually doesn't work very well with some other ones like SCD and whatnot. Like the way we use it, we get extremely good performance out of Zookeeper with very minimal effort. Something like SED requires a significant amount of tuning to get the performance and a very specific setup to get the performance that we need. So Zookeeper works very well for us. So we're not gonna switch that out.
So there was kind of I would say, a similar question from Zhao Yu. He asked if etcd or console is a backend. I assume the answer is no. We only support Zookeeper, but I don't know.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. Like those both, like, kind of etcd and console are kind of like the newer generation built off of Raft, everything. But honestly, Zookeeper is just extremely battle tested. I mean, we've really kind of beat the crap out of this thing, and it has worked very well. I mean, we've been doing a lot of load testing over the last couple of weeks. We have 0 issues with it, so we feel very confident in sticking with Zookeeper. But again, the whole idea of this HA setup was that you don't have to manage it yourself. We're like, Rancher is managing it completely. So if one of these goes down, it does the leader election. Like, we figure it all out. You don't really have to worry about it.
So there's another question. This was from Ben Cool. He asked if the HTTP is disabled on the Rancher HA configuration, will it redirect HTTP to HTTPS?
No, it won't. So usually what you'll end up doing is, well, I'm trying to think. So typically the way we set this up is you set up three nodes, and then you put something like ELB or like an edge load balancer in front of it. So you would probably do the HTTP redirection there. Honestly, we should probably build that in. I think we should add that. Let me write that down, because I know that comes up with quite a bit, but we should just support that basically. I'll see if we can get that in pretty soon.
You can thank him. So next question. This is from David Zielkowski, and he was asking, why do we need to manually export or import SQL rather than just ask for the IP, user, password for the database, and do it from the UI?
Okay, you don't. So if you so the idea of what I was showing with where did I have that set up? I was running the report here. The idea, if you already have Rancher, like, because if you had already had it set up talking to an external database, then you won't get this. Let me disable that. You won't get this screen here where it says set up an external database. It'll actually just be like green. It'll say, hey, you're already talking to an external database. And so the idea of this wizard was to kind of guide you through, because most people don't really think about that. They do Docker run Rancher server, which is running the embedded database. So this is like, that step can be skipped if you had already done that. You don't actually have to export and import into another one.
Great, thank you. And this is a question that I think you probably discussed this, but just someone was mentioning that in their Rancher they don't see this HA option. And just to explain, this is something that's not that's coming out in the next release, correct, Darren?
Yeah. So when I clicked, there's one little catch that anyone caught this. It's in 101. We just barely kind of missed the cutoff. So 101 is coming out very, very, very soon. You know, anytime you release something, you find like the immediate bugs right afterwards. So this is coming out very soon. I really wish we made it in 1.0. I kind of screwed that up, but it's coming very, very soon.
Great. And then there was a couple of questions that were about, like, when the Rancher, why HA? So what is the impact of running a single Rancher server and having it go down? I think that's a really important topic. So, like, why bother with HA? When do I need HA? Why not? Because a lot of people are running Rancher in production already on just a single node and happy with that. It doesn't, if the Rancher server goes down, it's not as if containers start shutting down and hosts fall over. This is really just more about access to the management layer. Yeah, and so I'll be honest, for the vast majority of people, the HA setup is actually overkill. They don't really need it. Like, what I think is really efficient setup for most people is if you just run a single Rancher server connected to like RDS. That actually works very well for everyone, for the vast majority of people. So I'll tell you what the impact of the Rancher server going down is and everything. And so Rancher server, we do our best to separate basically like the control plane from the data plane. The data plane being like where containers are running and networking and all that. So if the Rancher server is taken down,
all that means is you can't provision new containers, and if containers like die or something like that, obviously we're not going to spawn new ones because the Rancher server is down. But all of your containers will still work. All the load balancing works, DNS works, the metadata service works. Like all of those things are distributed out to the nodes, and they don't talk back. They don't like, when you're accessing them at runtime, they're not talking to the central server. So for most people, if you have a good database, so you're just using like RDS and you're doing backups, you can just run a single Rancher server container. And then when you want to do an upgrade, you just bring it down for a little bit because, it only takes like, maybe 5 minutes to do an upgrade. And that works fine for most people. So the HA setup is really for people who need true HA. They can't have downtime. They want, this thing to be completely up all the time. And so many enterprise organizations, no matter what the service is, have that. This is just a requirement. They need an HA setup, and so we have that.
Great. There's a bunch more. What's the upgrade process going to be like for Rancher and HA? So how will you upgrade the HA cluster?
Yeah, so the HA is then, the upgrade is managed completely by us. So it's basically, when I ran that script, so at some point I ran this script, you would then just put a new version. So it's Rancher 1.1.1, something like that. Just put a new Rancher server version, and then we roll out the upgrade for you. So,
great.
Yeah, well, you have to run that script on each node. So you run it on the first node, then the second node, then the third node.
Okay. I think. Yeah, there's a lot more, but I think we should keep moving. I'll try to answer them directly in the chat. And keep firing your questions, guys. I've probably got 80 questions that have come in. It's it's insane. So I'm trying to answer them as we go. Some of them we'll try to get to at the end. I want to make sure we don't take too long before we let our friends from Sony talk. So why don't you finish up with your demo, Darren, and we'll keep it moving.
Yeah. Okay. So so what I wanted to show now was, so one of the major things, so the last meetup that we did, we talked about, let me make sure, I think I might have broken, or was changing some things here. Okay, so the last meetup, what we talked about was Kubernetes, and so we showed off the Kubernetes environment, and now with the GA, we added in Swarm too. As Shannon was saying earlier, we'll probably add in more frameworks down the line, So what I wanted to demo was just, kind of that whole experience again. Just quickly go through Kubernetes, Swarm, and then Cattle, which is kind of the native framework within Rancher. And so what I have here is I have an installation, and I've set up 3 different environments. So in each one of these environments, if I click here, I have, I think, 3 hosts in each one. So what I can do is, if I go to the Manage Environment screen, so I have the default second and third. If I go to this second one, I can just edit this. I'm going to call this, I'll just rename it to Kubernetes. And here I just say, okay, I want Kubernetes. Just save that. Okay, so now let me switch to that environment. Switch there. So it's currently, I think I was in the default environment. So you can see now it's actually going and deploying Kubernetes. It's setting up. So we already had a host. It creates the Kubernetes stack, and now it's waiting for the services to start. So if I go here, click on System Stacks, I can see kind of under the hood what's going on. Basically, it's deploying all these services. Right now, it looks like it's bringing up SED. And then, yeah, again, it's starting all these other ones here. Okay, so that takes just a little bit to start up. Let me go back to the managed environment. And so the experience for Swarm is basically the same thing. So if we go to this third environment that I have set up here, we'll just rename this one to Swarm. Oh, did I already click Swarm on that one? So basically, okay, so we're going to click Swarm, and we save that. If I go and I switch to this environment, oh, Well, there's a little screen that's it's a very similar thing we're setting up. If I can go to system here, you can see it's actually deploying, like we have deployed Swarm and the Swarm agent. This confuses people a little bit. I'll just point this out, is there's Swarm and the Swarm agent, these two containers. The Swarm agent doesn't actually run on every single host. Most people expect that, but it's not. That's not the way we've set this up. So it's like slightly different. So people think like something went wrong here, but it's actually the way it's supposed to work. So with Swarm, okay, sorry, let me go back and see. Is Kubernetes done? Kubernetes usually takes a while. Yeah, it's still starting up. But okay, let me just switch over to another environment here where I think I have everything already running. Kubernetes and Swarm. Okay, so between all these things, we're trying to keep as much as possible like a consistent Rancher experience, bringing all the same functionality and features to these various frameworks. So like one of the things is access control. So here, right now I have this open. It's open up to the world. I can go and I can turn on GitHub access control. So let me do this. Copy that. There's a link. Okay. Let me register a new application. Demo again. Okay. Okay. So we just need to put in this URL here. Put in this URL. Register application, which gives you these two things: the client secret and oh, sorry, that was client ID. Then the client secret. Okay. Make sure this works. Okay. Okay. Okay, so now this site is secured. You can see I've got my little logo up here. I build the cloud. I can go and I can add more users if I want. Like if I can go, so these different environments, I go and I go to, let's say, the Kubernetes environment here. Oops. There we go. If I go to the access control here, I can add more users to this environment, and then basically give them a different role, like member if it's read-only or restricted. So I can control the access, to each one of these environments. So now if I go to, let's say, Kubernetes, oh, I'm already here, Kubernetes, and I go to kube control. So like one of the primary ways that people are familiar with, accessing Kubernetes is through the command line through kube control. So I go here and I can generate the configuration. So you can see we put in our API keys. So like these API keys are specific basically to this user. So we control the access to Kubernetes basically through Rancher. And so the same thing we do with Swarm here. Is again, if I go to Swarm and I go to the CLI here, I can say generate config. And this will actually give me, you can see it's downloading a zip because Swarm, the way Swarm works is all based off of certificates. So this generates a certificate specific to that user. And then they just need to set up, basically extract that zip into that directory and set up these environment variables. So again, so we're controlling all of the kind of the security and access control to both these things, Kubernetes and Swarm. And let me talk a little bit about how Swarm works. Is as I was talking about before, like one of the things that's kind of you run into a stumbling block is with like firewalling and stuff like that is that inbound connections to hosts kind of cause problems. So what we've done is with Swarm is that we don't actually expose the Docker socket out of the host. The Docker socket for our Swarm setup is still local. It's still actually just running, like you just do, you run it on the regular like bar run Docker sock. So it's a Unix socket local. So we don't require anyone to set that up to publish it out. Instead, what we do is, if I go to this infrastructure view, I can kind of show a little bit, oh, no, sorry, let me go to the CLI. When we show here, so you notice when the Docker host here, this IP, it's actually the same IP as up here. It's actually the same URL. So when you talk to Swarm, actually what happens is you first hit Rancher, and you hit that WebSocket proxy component that I showed before. The WebSocket proxy does the authentication, so it looks at the TLS certificate, authenticates you against Rancher, and then once it figures out who you are and where you want to go, it then goes through our tunnels and private network to get to wherever your swarm master is running. So here I have the swarm master running here. So once the request comes into the swarm master, then the swarm master has to talk to all the Docker daemons. That is then, again, it goes over our private network, and it actually goes through a component in the network agent. Oh, sorry, a component in the Rancher agent, which leverages like the same tunneling capability. And so basically we tunnel it through that, and then it talks to the Docker daemons. So basically the end result of all this is like you don't need to set it, you never need to expose Docker out to the world. It's always through Ranchers. Like, we secure it, we put credentials on it, we manage the TLS for you, and you don't have to worry about reconfiguring the daemon at all. Yeah, okay. So the last thing I just wanted to show is, so between all these environments, we have support for the catalog. So we've gone through and we've added a bunch of community templates. If you look at the catalog feature we've had out for a couple months now, and it's really just expanding really quickly, like just tons of things being submitted through the community. So this catalog is very rich since we just pushed out Kubernetes and Swarm. Those ones are still building up, but you can see we still have catalog support for basically each one of these environments. So you can have, catalog works all the same. It's backed by Git. You can, we'll have a demo. Sony will show kind of later how they're using the catalog. But for each one of these environments, I can still go here, the same simple experience of just going and clicking launch and deploying an application. But if I'm deploying, let's say, a catalog entry into Kubernetes, you're going to end up with like services, replication controllers, and pods. So you can see, like, I think I had like some Redis stuff deployed here. If I'm doing the same thing, I'm deploying in a cattle environment, I'll end up with what we would call a stack. Where's one? Weekend's a good one. I just launched that. Okay, so here you can see in the cattle environment, this ends up being basically the cattle native thing. And then if I go to Swarm is also a similar thing where I think I was deploying. Let me go here, library. I can just go and deploy something like WordPress. So this will go and it starts deploying out basically a Docker Compose template. So we have the same experience across kind of all three of them, but then the end result is kind of specific to the various framework, Swarm, Kubernetes, or cattle. Yeah, I think that basically wraps up what I wanted to demo with you. I just wanted to show just kind of the overview of what we've added with Swarm, how all these things play together, and how the experience works across these different frameworks.
Okay, Darren, that was awesome. There are a ton of questions, but I think by and large, I've been answering a lot of them as we've gone. I think the best thing to do, given time, it's 11 now. We've been going for an hour, 11 here in California at least. And so what I will do is I'll keep trying to answer, and Darren will keep trying to answer some of the questions in the track. I want to, I've answered a ton. I think there's probably still 70 or 80 that I haven't gotten to. But at the moment, I want to stop and thank you first of all for doing the demo and going through so much stuff. As we talked about, this will all be available in the very short term in the next release of Rancher. So you'll be able to see all the cool new HA stuff that Darren was demoing in the beginning. And now I am going to transition over to our friends from Sony. Guys, are you ready to go? Srdjan, Don, are you all set?
Yes, we're set.
All right. So let me pass you guys the ball. Give me 1 second here. and you should be able to, there you go, share your screen. Do you see the little share your screen button, the one I missed earlier?
Yeah.
There it is.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I do. Looks great.
So let me see. Do you see the control panel as well?
Right now I see, no, I see a nice big blue PlayStation Network PowerPoint slide, or looks like.
Cool. Cool. So hi all, thanks for joining this webinar. We wanted to show how we use Rancher Catalog here at Sony PlayStation Network to improve our development infrastructure and efficiency. Before we start, we thought we could present ourselves. And let me click. So who we are. My name is Srdjan Bosckovic. Since it's almost impossible to pronounce, most people here in States call me Srdjan. Japanese folks say Srdjan, but true pronunciation is Srdjan. I'm Director of Engineering here at SNEI, Sony Network Entertainment, and my primary focus here is client software architecture and continuous integration and delivery setup. I've been at Sony for almost 15 years now. It's amazing. And in various different organizations and sites. So Sony Sweden, Japan, and US. And I've been working mostly with mobile technology stack. I have 3 kids and 2 cats. Here with me is Don Olmstead. He's also known as Director of Troublemaking and Cat Memes. He's Senior Software Engineering here at SNEI, and his primary focus is client development in infrastructure, browser engine integration, and low-level graphics. Don has been at Sony for almost 4 years now. Yeah, mostly working with browser technology stack. And he has 1 kid and 2 cats. Briefly about PlayStation Network. So basically, we are a global multi-site developer organization that focuses on applications and services for PlayStation. Our headquarters is in San Mateo, but core development for client side of things is happening actually here in San Francisco. Services that we provide are mostly oriented towards PS4 console, but actually do expand beyond PS4, so and expand to web and mobile and TV sets and whatnot. That's kind of the main reason that why our core technology stack is web tech. So we use web tech to develop and provide services, and also from development point of view. Development process point of view, we use SAFe and deliver our increments on weekly. So this is a brief intro about that. So let's go to the actual problem we want to resolve. So here's an illustration of a problem. So the organization setup we have allows people to experiment and improve everything. So we are really striving for open source mentality, even internally within the company. So anything is open to anyone, which means that people have a lot of crazy and innovative ideas and make a lot of tools that become popular. So here's an example of a tool. It's called Soror. And what Soror does is it's a very simple thing. It actually fetches the PS4 firmware from Japan and makes sure it's available locally here in US, so people don't have to lose time on network connections to download firmware themselves. Yet it's available to them. The tool was made by a developer, and he hosted it on his local laptop, old laptop. And every time he would go on conference, PTO, or whatnot, that tool and service would disappear. So that's the thing we wanted to resolve. And basically, that's how we stumbled upon Rancher and Rancher Catalog. So we used Rancher Catalog as a solution to this, and basically to host and provide different tools and services. And so far, our primary focus was or is on internal operational efficiency tools. And as you can see here, just to honor the day, we have actually updated to Rancher version 1. And we have plenty of services available already. But at the same time, this means a huge step away from the traditional setup where we actually ask IT to host the service and maintain that service and security that it reviews and so on. So we actually had to pick up and take over most of that responsibility ourselves. So what we do is that we use Rancher Catalog as our primary as a GitHub repository and primary source of storage of the tools and services that we enable. And we have a gating policy mechanism where basically people provide PRs, pull requests, in case they want to add or update their service. And basically this gives us a full traceability of requests and formal approvals, which makes IT and security happy and also gives us the freedom and flexibility. So in practice, it works that a application or a tool or a service is source code is stored in some repository. We use Drone to build that tool, and Drone stores creates a Docker image and stores it in our internal Docker registry. We send update request to Rancher Catalog, and in case of major and minor updates, we do the update request for PRs, but in case of patches, we do a simple notification through Slack, so actually we admins update the tool, update the catalog. And basically, Rancher Catalog picks up the update, and Rancher picks up the update, and application instance is available for internal use. So the values, this is pretty rudimentary use case, but it has been extremely valuable to us. So far, we have improved tools and services stability and availability. So basically, no more PTO, and since the service is hosted on IT server racks and not on all laptops, we haven't had any downtime so far, actually, for any of the services. Second value is that we have increased flexibility and speed for the entire engineering organization, because it's easy, extremely easy to add or modify new services. So we don't have to create the IT request or go through complex security reviews. Third value is that we have a full traceability of requests and approvals over time. So basically, IT and security is happy as long as we keep in shape. And fourth value is that we see a possibility to segment the tools and services both across different organizations. So for instance, front-end guys could have their own catalog, and back-end guys could have their own catalog of tools and services. And also we could split, over time we could split into separate flows. So CI/CD tools for front-end organization could be one catalog and so on. So this is a future opportunity, because right now we don't have way too many services available. So this is actually my last slide. So far in our experience with Rancher, we encountered some things that we kind of collide with our setup, and I'd like to highlight those. So since we do everything through catalog, we would like to be able to disable add stack button. So only services from catalog should be allowed. And basically, it's because right now anyone internally that has GitHub access can fire off a service without any approvals, and that could kill the entire initiative. So right now we have mitigated this by limiting access to Rancher. Second issue we encountered is that we feel that Rancher should support a bit more advanced role-based access control. So for instance, a service owner should have access to his/her service and nothing else. So they should be able to update or stop or initiate or restart the service. Catalog owner should have the access to all the services in that specific catalog and nothing else. And of course, admin should have the full access. Right now, users can deactivate hosts. Actually, when we talked to Shannon the other day, he said there is a restricted user level that we haven't been using so far. So we are going to look into that. Anyway, right now we have limited access to Rancher. And third issue I wanted to highlight is that we would like to be able to define upgrade policies per service and let Rancher handle upgrades automatically. So for instance, so we use Semver versioning policy for all our tools and services. And current policies that is if you do a major or minor change for your tool, you have to submit a new PR. But in case of patch, we don't actually require any PR. The service, the Docker image should just be upgraded. That right now is handled in manual way, and we would like to be able to specify policies so it's handled automatically. And that's actually everything I had. So we have a demo. We wanted to show you how we deploy a service internally. But before we do that, are there any questions? Hello?
Yeah, hey Srdjan. Sorry, I had muted myself. Yeah, there was one question that came in from the community. They were asking, when you guys build these templates, are you building the templates using are you building the templates using the cattle framework or Kubernetes? It looked like cattle from what you were showing there, so I assume that was cattle that you're using as the scheduler, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And then the other question would just be, how long have you guys been working with Rancher?
So I think we heard about it first time in November or something like that.
Yeah, we got tuned into Rancher when that drone meetup occurred with you guys.
Got it. So one of these meetups earlier in the year.
Yeah. We've been heavy drone users, so we kind of happened upon it in that way and gave it a go.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And we have been actively working with it since January, I believe. So things have happened pretty quickly. That's actually really amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely been moving very fast the last 6 months. I mean, really the whole time. So guys, I think probably the best thing now would be to jump into the demo. And if there's any more questions, please just in the question. There's so many coming in; it's hard to go through them all. But type Sony in the question, and we'll make sure that I'll ask the question for Don and Srdjan when you ask it. So why don't you guys jump into the demo, and I'll keep a track for any other questions that come in.
Alrighty. Okay, so now it's my turn. All right. So this is Don over here. I was one of the ones really pushing Rancher internally with the help of Srdjan. And for today, in honor of the fact that 1.0 was just released, I went ahead and spun up a nice new instance of Rancher on a local dev machine of mine. to give it a go. And as you can see here, here's a catalog. We have everything set up. We have quite a few services on this. Just to call out a few of them, we have Air Cover, that's a code coverage tool we use. David is something open source that we use to track NPM dependencies because for the most part it's a node shop over here in terms of the front-end development. We have Drone, we have some internal tools. We have Look Good to Me, a bunch of stuff all in the catalog, all running in Rancher. So today I wanted to kind of demo the flow of everything. And to demo, yesterday I spent a little bit of time creating a new service, exciting new service, and that would be this string pad repository. So, we wanted to, and this is obviously very important for the company, to be able to pad our strings. So we wanted that, we wanted that to happen. We have this service here. It's a REST API. You can ask it to pad strings. And it's very important for us to get this on the catalog. So I'm going to use this service as a way of demonstrating kind of how we work. So one of the pieces of the puzzle here is obviously Drone. Now internally we use Drone very heavily, and since the 0.4 release, which allowed you to easily push Docker containers, it's really enabled us to get to where we are now. So just simply, we have a Drone YAML. What does it do? It goes ahead and publishes this particular thing to our Docker registry. We give it some tags to get the symvert. So in this case, it's latest. We have a 0.1, and we also include a build number to differentiate them. And the thing is, we only want this to actually occur on the master branch. So this is sort of the plumbing that enables the developers to actually, utilize Docker and then Rancher for hosting service itself. Okay. So, at this point in time, I actually have this already pushed. There's a instance of it, or there's a container already built out, and I want to take that container and then I want to run it on the registry. So I have this little catalog test here that I use to try out new catalog entries. That's actually hooked into our Rancher instance currently. And in terms of keeping the accountability and the audit trail, one of the things we've been using is Looks Good to Me. This is another service from the creators of Drone. The idea is that it provides a status check, and this is actually based on protected branches. So currently we have the master branch protected, which means you cannot push to it unless you go through this approval process. So I have a pull request open over here, and I'm adding my service string pad. So we have a template we use here. So it's adding string pad. And if you can find a better way to pad strings, I'd like to hear it. So we're logged in as Srdjan here. And, looks good to me. It's based entirely on the GitHub comments on pull requests. So I am actually a maintainer on this. So I said looks to me. Looks good to me because I made it. And we're currently gated on it, and the approval is required. So we're logged in over here as Srdjan. which is also a great way to get your service published through this process. Just log in as your boss, and then type in "looks good to me."
Yes, and I really feel that this service is so important for us. So of course, it looks good to me.
So go ahead and add that comment. And ta-da, we can now merge it. So the merge button's there, we can confirm. Okay, and now we can pop over into the Rancher catalog. And hopefully it refreshed. We might have to force it to refresh because it's not, there doesn't seem to be a set time, and the Rancher catalog itself doesn't seem to get a notification when something changes. So I can go ahead and force that by just changing the admin. Or do we have any questions currently? I could maybe answer some of those while.
No specific questions have come in on anything you've been going through so far. So I think right now the
force it. So if I want to force it, I typically just rename the URL real quick and then give it a go again. Okay, come on, demo. Demos.
I'm glad it's not just us. Anyone who's been on these meetups before has seen usually it's me and Darren sitting here. Oh, hold on, let's ask some questions.
That all looks good.
So what you're expecting is to see it pop in here and see this. You should see your new service pop in once it was added.
Right. Let me totally break the catalog.
And you're trying to just get it to refresh. Sometimes it doesn't refresh.
Well, it sometimes takes a minute for it to refresh, or maybe I screwed up something. There we go. It is here.
Hey, there you go. Just like Darren, man. This is great.
All right, so we have our padding as a service. We have all our info there, and we have a default port of 7070. So I am to launch this particular thing. And we see here it's perfect. It is activating. Let's see. Activating. Okay.
Pulling the image.
Yep, looks good to go. All right, and we have that's padded. So,
but also full traceability. So now we know who enabled this service and also who approved this service.
Yeah.
And the idea is really that each release will come in, each service will be approved, and the goal would be that that's the only way for people to get access to the services. And where can they deploy them? Can they deploy them just in in your local data center? Can they deploy them on their own laptops? What are the options for deployment to environments?
So currently we have our main Rancher catalog, and we also kind of run one locally to allow you to make sure your catalog entries are fine, make sure everything's up and running right. So they can either run it on their own hosts, or I actually have this computer in particular for that. But also I wanted to kind of show what to actually update this. So, currently this API allows you to left pad. So I made a pull request last night that also adds the ability to right pad. So in case you wanted to pad your strings to the right, here's this new API. And what we can go ahead and do, and once again, I'll be able to get where actually I'm going.
Actually, I'm not so sure whether the right pad is so important for us.
I'm not sure either. Let's see. Log in as myself, and then I can also say it looks good to me. And StringPad is also locked down in terms of our who approves. So I am going to approve as well. Okay. And now we're waiting on our drone build. I'm going to go ahead and move this along. Okay. And we got the build going here. So right now it's actually going ahead and building out our Docker container with our awesome string pad with a write pad as well. And when that's done, we can go ahead and actually update our service, and we should be able to write pad as well. So while this goes, are there any questions currently running?
There was a question about monitoring. How are you guys doing monitoring? Are you doing any special monitoring once you deploy the services?
Nothing really. I mean, a lot of this is sort of ad hoc. It depends on how how much logging and sort of whatever the application developers come up with. And monitoring, we have our audit log that IT and everybody can look at. But for the individual services, that's really dependent on what they are.
So since these are internal development efficiency tools, we haven't really structured a strict monitoring setup. So it's mostly basically what you add into your service yourself, and then we can look at the logs.
Great. There's another question, kind of in the same vein. It just asked what registry you were using for your Docker registry.
We're using the currently it's the older one, wasn't it Python-based one? We have a trusted registry in the works, but that hasn't rolled out yet. So we're hoping to get that in our workflow as well. But currently our sort of old 1.0 registry has been working pretty well.
Great. I think that's all the questions. This is great, guys. This looks like a really slick way of providing tooling for your how many developers are working on the system?
So on client side is 250 people globally.
Great. And on locally, are you running it on top of VMware or bare metal? What's the actual host infrastructure you're running on top of?
So in this particular example, we are actually running a local instance just because we wanted to show the Rancher version 1. IT instance is running on, I believe it's VMware. Yeah.
VMware. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. This is fantastic. Great job, sharing, and thank you for being open to sharing what you guys are doing and how you're using it at Sony. I think based on the comments, I saw a lot of people talk about how a lifelong PlayStation fan. So keep up the good work, I suppose. And anything, if any of this is helping get the next PS5 out faster, I think we'll all be happy.
Yeah.
All right.
So, yeah, so we just have it updating now, so that's kind of the last piece of the puzzle in terms of the workflow. And if it actually does do the updates, then we should be able to pad right as well. We can keep on answering any questions or anything else you guys have for us. Yeah, obviously not super exciting to add strings.
Yeah,
no, I think we've covered the idea. This is great. I think we've you guys have been perfect. This is really it's great. And speaking of that, just in general, one of the things we want to do with these meetups more is invite users to come and present and talk. I mean, usually Darren and I do 90% of the talking, but I think these are always more entertaining and enjoyable for people when other open source projects are also presenting, like when we had Drone come on and talk about what they're doing. Or when users have come in and share their stories, how they're using these systems, because there's always so many great feature requests that come out during the meetups, and so many people have ideas for what they'd like to see.
All right, and there is the right pad.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. This was fantastic. Thank you all. All right. At that point, I think I want to. Darren, are you still there?
On mute. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. So we're going to jump in now, and we've got a load of questions. But before we get into all of those, I want to just go through a couple of changes that we made in the most recent release. Can you see my screen, Darren?
Yep, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So so maybe you can walk through these. We do this every month when we do the meetup. We just sort of announce what's latest and in the new releases of Rancher. But this is a big shift, obviously, because up till now we've been going through a 0.63 shift. I did want to put in the 0.63 release into this because there were a couple big enhancements like Kubernetes support there. Do you want to maybe start with that? Go through the new features, and then we can answer questions.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll go through, well, I mean, so our focus, really this last month, it's really been on getting 1.0 out and really stabilizing a lot. So, I mean, one of the biggest things really in this 1.0 release is the number of bugs and things that we've fixed. It's hundreds. I don't know the exact count, but we fixed a massive amount of bugs. But we still got some features in. So the first thing there on the 1.0 is a lot of scale testing. So the performance and scale of Rancher is significantly better, even just from 63. I mean, we really put in a lot of fixes, clean up a lot of things. Right, and I'm not sure if we've actually published like the official numbers, like kind of the rough numbers are right now is per environment, we can do very comfortably, like not pushing the system, like 50 hosts with about 2,000 containers per environment. But that can be replicated, over and over again across environments. So, just last night we were running 10,000 containers. It was running fine. We're doing one more round of scale testing today, which will hopefully be pushing much further than that. But for a 1.0, we're pretty happy with the scale. 1.1, you'll see it'll probably jump an order of magnitude. But so we added Swarm support. That's what I demoed today. Host IP port binding. This was actually issue number 53. So this was the longest, one of our longest open issues. Was when you bind a port to a host. Before we didn't support specifying what IP you wanted to bind it to. It was always all IPs. Now you can specify a specific IP. And then for our external DNS, we've used what we call is the agent IP for registering the IPs of the hosts to DNS. And so for people who have multiple IPs, or if they want to run the Rancher network private, but they want to use their public floating IP. We now have a label that you can put on the host that will get picked up by the external DNS component and publish that to the DNS. So if you're running our external DNS with Route 53 or Cloudflare or the various other providers we have, it's more configurable now. And so in 63, Kubernetes support, we demoed that. Dynamic machine drivers is actually a pretty big feature. Docker machine 0.6, I believe, or maybe it was 0.5, added support for actual external plugins. So now what you can do is go into the admin section and register a new plugin for Docker machine. And so this allows you to add new drivers to the add host screen, without any change on the Rancher part. And then the last thing was just splitting the catalog into library and community. We now have two separate GitHub repos. There's one that is, kind of officially supported by us. Those are like the certified ones. And then there's the community, which is, basically anybody can contribute there. And, that's what we're seeing with kind of a massive amount of catalog entries coming in.
I think that's a really important. There was actually a question about this earlier too. One of the things we've decided. I mean, we've had so many contributions to the catalogs and stuff that that we don't want to be in the kind of be in the business of testing everybody's idea for a community catalog. So we wanted to open up the community catalog to anything and anyone to provision. So there's no guarantee that that what's in there has gone through a ton of testing, or but it is. What there is there's a GitHub repo for the community catalog. If something's not working, you can file an issue, or if you like sort of the direction but maybe want to change it, you can just fork it, put it in your own private catalog. So there's a lot of ways that you can sort of take care of using the community catalog, but it is definitely kind of something you want to use at your own discretion and look at, kind of understand what you're deploying there. It's not tested by Rancher or guaranteed by Rancher in any way what's in the community catalog. Think of it sort of like using Docker Hub. It's a big public repo that people can contribute to, and we love contributions there. I mean, so many of them are really useful, and we anticipate seeing quite a few. We certainly would love to get to the point where we're certifying some of those things as being sort of vendor supported or coming from the vendor. We haven't necessarily gotten to that point yet, but could certainly seek that. But that big switch is there. There's some great documentation on how to create catalog items. I saw a question that Keith Raja just asked about that. There's a good blog post that explains it. There's also some information in the docs on it, but definitely if you look, there's a blog post that goes into it in depth. We also covered it quite a bit in our meetup on the catalogs back in January. So in January we did a full meetup about catalogs. It's recorded, and you can take a look at that. It'll give you a really good understanding of how to post these. It's really pretty straightforward, though. I mean, you can basically create any Rancher environment, export the configs, and that's a catalog item. I mean, a catalog item is basically just a set of compose files or Kubernetes files or Swarm files plus some Rancher compose file that describes the catalog item. There's a little bit more to it than that, but not much. So, Darren, other than that, I think the big thing left is kind of to just sort of cover, dive into some of these questions. So I've got just dozens and dozens of questions, and as always, we'll try to answer these unless the person who asked it has left. So if you left, we're not gonna get to it, but we'll try and go through all your questions and answer them as we're going. One of the questions that I saw a couple people ask about was Convoy. So if you've been using Rancher for a while, you see Rancher Convoy. And there was a question from Ashwin. He said, can you share some details on how to use Convoy with Rancher to allow for data volumes to be movable? Is there a GUI integration to walk through this, or does this only have to be done at the CLI level? Darren, do you want to kind of try and answer that?
Yeah, so the best approach right now is actually use Convoy NFS. That's the most stable storage integration. If you want to be able to have shared data, data between different nodes, or have them movable. So when you're doing that, you really need to create named volumes. And then if you create named volumes, then when the container goes away, we can create a new container with the same volumes. So don't use a data volume container. actually use named volumes. And there's a little bit of support in the UI that you can see storage pools and the volumes, but it's pretty minimal. Most of the interaction is really more through the Docker CLI of creating and deleting and listing the volumes.
Great. There was another question that was sort of similar. Rafael Bernardo asked about this. He was saying, is it possible, using Convoy is not that intuitive, would it be possible to do like a drop-down menu on service creation to show, Convoy Gluster and then be able to deploy something to allow failover? I think that's the question. Sorry, it's a little bit hard to read here. But, when you, maybe a better way to point this is once you've created a cluster for Gluster or you've set up an NFS, how do you actually mount those volumes in and deal with them for HA? So how do you use storage in an HA setup in Rancher?
Yeah, so right now that's basically the best approach is through the, like if you're using the compose format, you just do the volume driver. So when you specify the container, you say volume driver it'll be the name of the storage pool that you created from Convoy. Like when you deploy Convoy from the catalog entry, it creates a storage pool called something like Convoy NFS. That ends up being the volume driver. So I have to agree, it is not very intuitive. There's a lot of focus right now kind of in the company on storage and enhancing that experience, but that ended up being a kind of a post 1.0 thing. So you'll definitely see a lot of improvements in the storage integration and making all that stuff much more seamless.
Great. So there was another question, and I think this goes, it's funny because we started the demonstration talking about the HA configuration of Rancher. Alam Syed asked if it was possible, or do we have plans for a similar stack of HA capabilities for a web server, or just like we do with the Rancher server. So I think just to be clear that you can, if you wanted to take a web server or any other front end and do that same type of HA, that's absolutely supported in Rancher. If you just if you launch any service, you can configure it for HA at the by implementing a load balancer, by deploying it across multiple hosts. I mean that's absolutely supported. Alam. So hopefully that answers your question. The next question, Darren, was from Alec Lazarescu. I hope I said that right, Alex. What exactly are you load balancing with the load balancer? Just Rancher internal stuff, or is your HA active load balancer support? I guess that's supporting everything else. So what all? I think that's the question.
So the load balancer so when we set up an HA set up with Rancher basically works exposing pretty much 443 on each host. That's the endpoint. So the load balancing is kind of, you really do either need to put like round robin DNS or load balancer, like a simple TCP load balancer in front of it, like ELB, if you want to load balance between the nodes. So the load balancer that we launch from Rancher is serving a couple of different purposes. One, it's doing SSL termination. Second, it's doing routing, because certain requests go to the WebSocket proxy, other requests go directly to cattle. And for the best performance, in the diagram that I showed, like I was showing the graph, I had load balancer going to WebSocket proxy, going to cattle. In reality, there's a separate path that goes from the load balancer directly to cattle. And so for the most performant, so we use like the host name path, the path-based routing capability of our load balancer to move that traffic around. And then the last thing is that it does actually load balance within the private network that gets formed between those three, like the three servers. And so if cattle locally went down, but let's say WebSocket proxy was still running on that host, then the request would come in, and if it was to WebSocket proxy, it would work. But if the cattle component was down, it would then actually send it across to a different host. So it gets a little harder to do. Like let's say you put like ELB in front to like determine, if the node's up or down, actually requires like more than just one simple health check, because there's various components behind the load balancer.
Great. Another question. This one's from Robert Elliott, and there's a couple questions about Kubernetes from kind of the Kubernetes discussion we had earlier. Robert said, in the last meetup, Darren pointed out you could edit an existing default environment to switch to Kubernetes. That works. But if you create a new environment for cattle, then to see the catalog, then Kubernetes gets hosed, and you end up rebuilding. Are there any qualifiers for in mixing, matching, switching environments? Can you talk a little bit about mixing, matching, switching environments? Because I think, first of all, a lot of people don't realize you could even switch one to create an environment. You can actually edit it and change from being, say, a Kubernetes environment to a cattle environment, or vice versa. But do you want to just discuss that a little bit? What are the qualifiers? Because I think, sometimes there's certain times where you don't want to do this.
To be honest, I wonder if there's a specific bug or something that you ran into. I'm not actually aware of any specific qualifiers that would prevent you from switching between. The only thing that's kind of confusing is, let's say if you create a cattle environment and you deploy stacks in the cattle environment, then you switch to Kubernetes, those stacks will go into the system view. You'll see them different. But honestly, it should work. So I'm really curious to what the specific issue was, because basically what happens when you switch, let's say, from Kubernetes to Swarm, we just delete the Kubernetes stack and then deploy the Swarm stack. So you will probably leave some artifacts behind, because say if you're running Kubernetes and Kubernetes deployed a bunch of pods and you switch to cattle, you'll just see a bunch of pod containers running there that aren't really associated with things. So I mean, really, that I don't see people I don't think it's a common use case to be switching back and forth between these a lot. So it's I'd really say, for the safest, experience, would just start with a clean environment that doesn't have anything. Obviously have hosts, but don't deploy other services and then just pick if you're on Kubernetes or Swarm.
Thanks, Darren. And there's a question that Sean Tentralis asked. He says, is it possible to take advantage of Kubernetes' new multi-AZ feature in 1.2 since we're running 1.2?
That one I don't, I saw that question. I don't have the specific details of how to support it. I believe we should be able to. Rancher itself is runs multi-AZ. So it's probably just a little bit of scheduling and maybe some kubelet parameters. But I'm not 100% sure on it. I'll have to look into it, but there's a good chance that we can support it.
Sean, for that kind of question too, and if you wouldn't mind just asking the question again in the Rancher GitHub issues, that's a great place to fire in something like, hey, this doesn't seem like it would work, or I can't get this to work. And that will sort of trigger one of our engineers to hopefully take a look at it, and we'll see if it's something that we can understand why it's not working, if it's not working, or maybe it doesn't sound like something we've tested, I think is the best way to think about it. So let's start with that. There was another question go ahead.
I was just going to say, when we first did our Kubernetes, we were actually, it was before 1.2 came out, we were actually running an alpha version of 1.2. So for the 1.0, we did just switch to 1.2, the official release. But there are, a lot of new features in 1.2 that, we probably haven't specifically tested.
Great. There's a question Hendrik Hofstadt asked. He said it was Rancher OS related. Do you plan to implement deeper integration of Rancher and Rancher OS? So one could, for example, use the Rancher UI to roll out Rancher OS upgrades across all of your hosts and move the containers meanwhile. So basically, migrate all the containers off, update the OS, then bring it back into production, I think is what he's talking about there. Or change some, Rancher OS specific settings like system containers from one central point. It's a great question, Hendrik. It's definitely something we've talked about and would like to do. We've at the moment we've really been very focused on keeping the two projects relatively separate, so that they are, they can both stand on their own and they don't really require one another. But the use cases you just described are exactly the ones we've been talking about internally that would be very useful. Is sort of upgrading Rancher OS centrally and sort of modifying, doing kind of rolling upgrades of your whole cluster on that. I think the rolling upgrade feature is probably doesn't necessarily need to be specific to Rancher OS from our perspective. That would, that would have some other that should work for anything, not just for Rancher OS. But you could certainly do the Rancher OS upgrade as a central function. That we see that being a very useful feature. Darren, you want to chat about it?
Yeah, so I want to talk specifically about that rolling upgrade one, because again we do try to keep these products very very separate from each other. So people don't get the impression that they're tightly coupled or require each other. And so with the rolling update, this is something that applies also to like CoreOS and Ubuntu and whatnot. Of like you want to be able to confirm that you're on a certain patch level, kernel level, whatever it is. And so that is something that we're looking at in terms of how can we deploy services that roll out and basically monitor and upgrade the host OS. So it would apply to Rancher OS and CoreOS and other distributions too.
Okay, getting through these. Wow, good job, Darren. All right, there was the question. This was from Jose Porcel. He said, "Do you plan to support GitLab? I see everyone loves GitHub, but we use GitLab in-house. So where is the GitHub integration tight, and where can GitLab be used easily?" Because I think the real answer here, Jose, is our integration with GitHub is the only real integration with GitHub is on the access control. And there's a lot of other options. You don't need to use GitHub for that. You could use LDAP or Active Directory, or we have our own little database in Rancher if you don't have any of those things. So you don't need GitHub for the access control. The other area where we've been talking about GitHub quite a bit is for hosting the catalog items. But there, Darren, correct me if I'm wrong, you can use any Git repo. So GitLab will work just fine. You can host, you can host your own GitHub or your own GitLab and use that for your private catalog just fine. Correct, Darren?
Correct.
Yeah.
So the only
same with Bitbucket would work for that. Anything would work for that, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. As long as it sort of exposes a Git-based, string. We just need a Git-based URL to pull from that should have the catalog items sort of designed in the same framework.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, let's see here. There's a question from Raphael. He said, "Can you help me convert my rancher.mycompany:8080 to https://rancher.mycompany.com?" So I think it's about taking Rancher and making it available as from being on port 8080 to being under SSL and on port 80. I would assume is sort of the requirement here.
Yeah. So I mean, for that one, I was going to say that's probably a good question to ask on the forums or put it in an issue. Forums would probably be best. But we can point you to the steps that need to be taken, because it does require you to like re-register the nodes and possibly redeploy like the network agent and load balancers. So to switch URLs is kind of a multi-step thing. So I think if you ask that probably on the forums, we can help you out and point you to the docs and whatnot where to do that.
Great. So here's a question that's sort of a general question that Luca Critelli asked, and he was saying, cattle versus Kubernetes. When would you use cattle? Is there a reason to switch to Kubernetes? Performance, environment size? What's your take?
You want me to answer that, or?
I mean, I can if you like, or I think you go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really up to the user. The reason why we support cattle, Kubernetes, and Swarm is because we don't have a very specific kind of opinion about this, and so we built cattle as kind of what we thought was like the best experience. So it's definitely very easy to get going with cattle and scale up services, and there's a lot of features, but there's also a lot of similar features, and so it kind of depends on which framework you prefer yourself. I mean, I very much look at this as kind of like a puppet and chef type thing, where there's just different frameworks and people have different, they pick one or the other. There's not a specific, in terms of like scaling or performance, one works much better than the other. They all have their pros and cons, and we see them, being like some have strengths in different areas. Like Swarm is very good in the CI/CD world. It's very easy to get up and running and integrate. Same with cattle. But in terms of like large-scale production deployments of like complicated applications, Swarm doesn't really tend to excel there. But then Kubernetes has like kind of Google heritage and works well. So I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's really what your preference is. I don't know, Shannon, if you want to add something else there.
Yeah, I think the big thing here too is with all three of these, the pace of innovation is pretty fast. I mean, we're talking about adding Mesos. It's something that will happen as well. I mean, there's a lot of innovation happening in the communities around these things, and that's one of the things we wanted to expose. So you'll notice, like in Rancher, Kubernetes implementation and Swarm implementation, we really don't wrap these things. They are native implementations of the service. So everything that works in Kubernetes should work just fine in Rancher. And more and more, anything that we want to stay out of the way, so that because one of the things that's going to happen is these products are just going to keep getting better. I mean, we're still in the first half of the game. It's like so much development is going in. So many people. We work with the team at Docker really closely. We work with the team at Google really closely, and I don't want to say that we're Switzerland, but we sort of want them all to be good and want them all to work really well, because that means more people will be using containers, and that means more people will understand that containers are a great way to write faster and better code. So we want to be really generally positive on everything and let people, kind of play around, and whatever works for you is fine. Don't feel like you need to make one decision either. I think one of the things that we try to point out to people is, under the covers, this is all the same. We're all deploying basically the same containers onto the same hosts with the same, outcomes, more or less. I mean, there's slight differences in how they do HA. There's differences in how they do networking. There's a few things that are different about, maybe, the compose template versus sort of the replication controller templates and stuff. But, don't let somebody get hung up on whether they're using Kubernetes or Swarm. There's no right answer. These are all good. They all do the same stuff. Pick one for now and move forward. And the idea of re-architecting to switch is like an hour's worth of work, right? I mean, once you've actually built the containers, switching orchestrators is just about sort of like, maybe we should try and take advantage of some cool thing that's now available in Swarm in the future and do that. So, okay, let's keep going. That was a good question, though. We could spend a whole session talking about that. How can you monitor Rancher OS? This is Jose has asked a couple questions about monitoring. How can you monitor Rancher OS systems with tools like Nagios or Shrinkin that rely on an RPE on the host? Also, related to monitoring, how can you centralize logs from Rancher and its containers? What would be the best approach? Just any general overview on those. So Rancher OS level monitoring and Rancher central monitoring.
Yeah, I mean, so basically how you monitor these systems, I mean, I think it's largely how it's not much different from how you monitor anything else. Like there's a great community catalog entry with Prometheus for monitoring Rancher. I'm not sure if it has Rancher OS tie-ins, but I know the people who did it are running on Rancher OS. So it works with Rancher OS also. So, I mean, these are, just deploy your standard monitoring tools. So like in the catalog, we have Sysdig and Datadog. Those are great tools for monitoring. In terms of log aggregation, we also have Elasticsearch in there. So using basically Logspout to pump all that stuff into Elasticsearch and viewing it in Kibana. So, basically there's a lot of great community tools out there to do monitoring, and they all work great with Rancher and Rancher OS.
Great. Yeah. And on the Rancher OS side, is there anything special that you need to deal with for things that support, like Nagios? Because the agents aren't containers natively, how would you do that?
Yeah, so some of the, I guess, kind of, Nagios, I'm not totally sure about Nagios. I mean, there's kind of like a newer generation of monitoring tools that are all becoming more container native, and they're already packaged as containers, and those work great. If you're dealing with a little bit more like legacy tool, you might have a little bit of hiccups, but basically if you deploy it with the IPC host, net host, privileged, PID host. It's like you switch all the namespaces to the host level. It comes down to pretty much your container is running at pretty much at the host level. The only thing that's different is the file system, but then you can bind mount in the directories you want to monitor. So I have seen Nagios work in some of these other ones, the older systems. I've seen them work. You need to make sure you set all the right options on the container to get it, a proper host level view.
Heng Pan asked a very similar question about recommended monitoring approach. I think just the recommendation right now is stick to the ones that, if you can, take one like use a Sysdig or a Prometheus or something that's container aware. But most of the monitoring systems are becoming container aware if they're not already. So, it's helpful to have something where the agent can be deployed as a container. That just makes life a lot easier for monitoring. So the Prometheus one in the catalog, that would be, if you can't use a public cloud version like a Datadog or Sysdig, I would agree with Darren that Prometheus implementation, it was shared by someone in the community. That's the kind of, it's a very high quality implementation. It's very configurable. It actually monitors Rancher's management server. It monitors all the agents. That's something we may bring up into an approved official version because it's so good. So there's something that would be a high recommendation from my side, and you can find that just under Prometheus in the catalog if you haven't seen it already. Okay, another question. This one, Alam asked, it's sort of I think this question we sort of touched on earlier when we were talking about this, so I won't spend too much time on it, but he asked, says some of the catalog items don't seem to work. He tested the GitLab version and it wasn't working. As we said before, we don't test all these things, but there's a second half of the question that I thought was really interesting. He said it would be good if extra details can be seen during the setup, and I think what you're meaning, Alam, is it'd be nice if I could specify more policy around scheduling or for a catalog item, or specify, more things. There's some things that people can do when they create the catalog items to allow for that. Some of the teams have done a really good job of, adding in tag-based scheduling rules and things where you can put tags onto hosts to say only deploy my monitoring agents on this host. The team at Sysdig and Prometheus have done pretty good implementations of that. But in general, we would like to do more there. I think the catalog area is one we're going to keep working on enhancing. So one area, right now, we basically have variable substitution as an option that the developer of a catalog item can implement. So they can put in some variables that you can modify and change as you deploy. But you're going to see, more options for that at a sort of higher level, I think, in the future. We'd like to come up with some standardized ways to sort of support that across the board on deployed containers or deployed catalog items. Okay, there's another question, and I saw a couple questions sort of in this vein, and it was about auto-scaling. And the question, this was from Alexander Trouzy. Hopefully I got that right, Alexander. But do you have any plans to support ways of automatically scaling hosts on demand? And absolutely, this is definitely a big feature that we had it on our kind of wish list for 1.0, and eventually the timing we said no, we can't do this, so we cut it and moved forward. But we definitely want to do this in the future, and there's a lot that Darren, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the thinking and the design that's going into that?
Yeah, I mean, so basically we already have like the Docker machine integration, which allows us to spin up providers in different clouds, and then also people can plug in their own Docker machine drivers, and they're actually not that difficult to create. So if you have like a custom setup, internally or something like your own private cloud that you have done something different, you can create, an integration there. So basically, I mean, the idea is if you're familiar with Amazon auto-scaling, how they work with like cloud metrics and whatnot, is really kind of follow that same paradigm of being able to collect the stats and everything. So we're already running, it's like we have a lot of this already in place. We're running CAdvisor. We have access to, a lot of information about what's going on the hosts and whatnot. We just basically need to aggregate those information to find the scaling criteria, and then basically when we hit the threshold, we can spin up a new host using the Docker machine. So there's a lot of the pieces there. We just kind of need to do the kind of the final bits. But this will be a huge feature. People have been asking for quite a while, and you'll definitely see it coming.
So the next question was from Keith Raja. Again, he asked a question about the creating of catalogs. Is there any documentation that shows how to create the catalogs? I think there is, Darren, but I figured I'd ask you. I assume it's in docs.rancher.com under your catalog. There should be some detail in there about creating it. But I'll go back and double check. If it's not there, there's some good blog posts that describe it, but we certainly should have good docs on it. So if it's not there, I'll double check and make sure. But I believe there's docs on that, don't you, Darren?
Yeah, I believe there's docs. I'm
yeah.
not
I know we don't read the docs as much as we should either, so don't feel bad. All right. Alam asked, can you also put some documentation of some comparisons of using Rancher as containers as a service versus Amazon ECS as containers as a service? That's a good one. Good question, Alam. Definitely, that's a good way to think of Rancher. Rancher is an alternative to ECS. The pros and cons are pretty straightforward. I think, like in most cases, Amazon's ECS service is going to be good. It's going to work really well if you're in an Amazon environment and you have no interest of ever running outside of Amazon. Then ECS is always going to be a great choice. We haven't done any integration with ECS. There's people that have suggested it and asked for it. We may at some point in the future look and say, maybe we could leverage ECS as a scheduler almost, and sort of allow you to create ECS environments. So there is some discussion and thought that may be one way to support ECS, within a Rancher framework. But for right now, Rancher and ECS are really alternatives. I think the advantage of Rancher is, Rancher is probably going to give you a lot more flexibility, even if you run on Amazon. Where you get with Rancher is the flexibility to tap into Kubernetes and Swarm and obviously Cattle and all the cool stuff that Rancher does, which I think is very advanced. It's our focus. It's something that we put a lot of energy into. So it's pretty far ahead of where something like ECS is right now in terms of capabilities and stuff. But but certainly, in the long run, Amazon will build something good. They usually do. So I think the main reason you would run something like Rancher is that you want to be able to deploy onto, anywhere. You want to be able to move off Amazon sometime in the future if something changes and you no longer want to run everything there. But another reason is you want to run, what we had a lot of people do, which is run Rancher locally for their developers on their own laptops even. So one of these days I'm going to have a presentation from one of our users I know real well, and he wants to talk about how they're running, basically Rancher environments for each developer. So each developer has local Rancher, and they use Rancher locally basically to spin up entire test environments, dev environments on their laptop that are based on, compose templates, and then modify code and push to like a local Git, build locally, test everything locally, and then push up for sort of centralized build and testing to, a central Rancher one where they're actually even using they even have their own micro Rancher server basically running locally, so that they don't even need to be online to be able to develop and work. The whole system is sort of portable. So that's, that's definitely some interesting things in terms of benefits, but I would say those are some ways to think about it. Okay, next question was from Jose. I have Convoy NFS running with, quote, insecure flag, quote, in version 3. I wonder if that setup is NFS v4 friendly. Does that question make sense to you, Darren? Do you want to answer that? I don't really know how to answer that question.
I'm not sure about the v4 part. The older version of Convoy NFS required you to set up insecure exports. That has been fixed. A natting issue that was changing the source port, so you shouldn't need insecure exports anymore. I'm not totally sure about the v4. I have to ask the engineers working on Convoy NFS about that.
Yeah, definitely a good thing if you're if you have a question about Convoy too, and in between these meetups and stuff, or we don't answer well, there's a Convoy project in GitHub separately, and they have issues. You can file issues right there and just get clarifications, or you can certainly file something in the forums. The forums are awesome. We really do put a lot of work into maintaining those, so definitely hit that up. Another Convoy-related question from Raphael. He was saying it'd be great if Convoy could back up to S3 from the UI. So I've had that request a number of different times. It's definitely something we've thought about and would love to be able to add. Okay, one of the questions that I saw an earlier question about this, and someone else asked it again, and Darren, you can talk about it because you're working with the guys at Cluster HQ, which was, will there be Flocker support soon inside of Rancher?
Yes, we very much want that. We like, and we have been working with Cluster HQ, and so we would very much, like to see that catalog entry there, so you can deploy Flocker and then leverage both the plugins and integrations they have with storage systems.
Okay. Another question: what's any release date for 1.0.1? That was a question that she kind of.
I always get in trouble when I say dates, but it's within a week because they're, the 8K one is a huge feature that we need to get out there, and then there's some little bugs that people hit, as soon as we release one out.
So, we've talked about data persistence quite a bit. I think maybe one of our next meetups will be all about this. John Jedini asked, what is the best or recommended service for volume persistence? Can you compare the pros and cons of Gluster versus NFS? Darren, do you want to talk through that?
I mean, I'd really say NFS is really the most reliable, the best one right now, just because of the maturity of NFS over the years, and also the fact that you can get like Amazon EFS hosted. That makes it a little easier. But I mean, that doesn't mean that there's anything particularly wrong with Gluster. We see it, a lot of people using that. The thing with Gluster is that when you deploy, let's say, the Gluster catalog entry, it's not like a fully managed Gluster. It gets Gluster up and running, but you still need to know Gluster. So if you really want to put that into production, you should have some Gluster experience. And so that's, I think, the kind of the caveat with Gluster. Yeah.
Okay. Raphael sort of was on that, he was talking about trying to mount from Convoy and some of the challenges. He was saying he was hitting an issue where he was trying to mount, www-data, :var/w HTML, and the WordPress container won't come up. So just seeing that, and I think he was saying he's using Gluster. So if you're hitting issues or you're finding something, where you're trying to access, something in the storage and it's not working, please file an issue or get in touch with us in the forums, and we'll help you troubleshoot it, or see if it's something that maybe needs to be enhanced or improved in the implementation. I think persistent storage is a big issue for us in the next release. It's something I would say is right at the top of our, kind of things we want to keep. We want to sort of take the next step in terms of making it easier, making it better quality, making it handle failure better, making it easier in the user experience. So now is a great time if you've got ideas or you're hitting problems or things aren't kind of working the way they want, to file issues, to get in touch with us and make suggestions about how to make storage, work the way you want to see it work in the next release of Convoy, Rancher, Flocker, all these things. We want to sort of really try to make the storage experience, kick butt, as we work towards like a 1.1, 1.2 release timeframe. Okay, the next question. I'm trying to understand this. Keith Raja asked, is it possible to assign catalog services to launch on a specific node? I think that's what we were talking about earlier, where some catalog, if you build a catalog item, you can definitely use tagging to say where you want things to go, but you'd have to sort of modify the catalog scheduling component within the catalog to be variable. So by default, the answer is it's only there if the person who built the catalog item put it in there. The catalog item could have a global scheduler, or it could just say launch one of these, or it might say launch 20 of these. What you want to do is just sort of take a look at the catalog's template, and if it doesn't match the scheduling you'd like to do, just fork the template, modify it, and either add your own scheduling logic or add in variable scheduling and post it back, or push that in. The great thing is these are all in GitHub, they're all pull requestable. You can help make them better. If you see a catalog item and you think it'd be even better if you could schedule it, help the person who took the time to write it by pushing a pull request to it and build it better. They're sharing their implementation, but not everybody has all the time in the world to maintain these things. So collaborate. We want the community to own these things and make them really kick butt. So thanks for the good question there. All right, next question. I think we've got about 10 more at least. Oh, maybe 20 more. Jeez, there's a lot. Okay, this question was from Renaud Blanchet, and his question was, the rancher and rancher question he asked earlier was based on the same concerns around the role-based access control management that Sony touched on in their presentation. One would not want a user in Group B to delete a host used by Group A. Was there a time frame in mind to address user roles in a more granular fashion to allow multi-tenancy without the inception setup? Are environments able to provide this complete separation where hosts can be dedicated to a single or multiple environments? So let me sort of talk about this. I think that it's worth sort of stepping back and talking about how we do isolation and tenancy in Rancher. So environments are at the core of isolation. So an environment is a set of hosts. Those environments are completely separate from one another. And you can have as many environments as you want in a system, but those environments will, are unique. When you create an environment, you add users in. Right now we only support 4 roles for users. So this is sort of an area for improvement. The 4 roles we have right now is the owner of a environment. The owner is the person who can create and destroy that environment. Then there are effectively what we call users in an environment, and a user has full ability within the environment to create hosts, create add and remove new hosts, start and stop containers, start and stop stacks. I mean, a user can do anything within an environment. But then there's 2 other types of users. There's what we call a read-only user, and a read-only user is basically has, as it sounds, they have no change ability. They can just come in and look at the stack. And then there is a 4th type of user, which is what we call a restricted user. And right now, the restricted user, the basic concept of a restricted user is they have no host-level control. They can't create or stop or start any hosts, but they do have ability to access and visualize all the virtual machines. Darren, that's correct, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Sorry, not the virtual machine, the containers. So they can come in and see the containers, they can create containers, they can create stacks and services. I think the request that, that some people are asking for is, could I be more granular? Could I have another role that said, I can start stacks, or I can start services, or I can only start catalog items, and then, if I started a catalog item, then I could destroy it or I could modify it, but no one else could modify it. So there's a lot of requests, and one of the things we're thinking about and have a plan to do is to implement a sort of fully configurable RBAC, which means you could create arbitrary roles. So you could create a role for an administrator that, or a user who could create certain stacks, or a user who couldn't create different stacks. So to be honest with you, though, before we do that, we'll probably expand the number of roles. I think we could, because it's much easier to just add in a couple roles and to make a full RBAC system within Rancher. So I think what you'll probably see happen in the next couple of releases is, a handful of new roles that give you different types. So if you have ideas for like, hey, this kind of role would be great. I'd like to be able to create a user who, can only access specific hosts, or can only access specific, stacks that they created, or they could only access hosts that they created. I mean, we come up with different roles, and I think it's very easy. So Renaud, if you have some ideas, please send them to me or share them with the community, and we'll certainly take them into consideration. We want to do a lot more in terms of even more granular RBAC than what's already there. Darren, anything you want to add to that?
No, I covered most of that.
Okay. So then there's another question that Alec asked, and he said, do you know if anyone is using Rancher to compose up and interconnect a bunch of servers that mainly bootstrap, Chef, or Puppet for the rest of their config? Do you have any thoughts on that architecture? We still have concern about Docker in production, and this would let us use Rancher on non-prod at least without having everything automated be a heavy Docker file, for instance. So Alec, I do know a few people who are doing things like this, and it's something that we're actually pretty interested in supporting in a more in-depth way. The idea of sort of spinning up an environment and then using Chef or Puppet natively to sort of deploy against it. There's a post just this week I read somewhere where someone talked about running their Puppet infrastructure on Rancher. So they actually just, all of Puppet was deployed as a Rancher service. But the use case you're talking about, I think, is really interesting. It's how to bring up a cluster and then use Rancher to manage it and then deploy using Puppet. It's definitely something that we're interested in talking more about. And so would love to chat with you, Alec, if you want to reach out personally and explain your use and how you think that might work better. And we're actually having some meetings with Puppet and Chef to talk about this as well. So we'd be interested in requirement gathering at the moment for this type of use case. Okay, next question. So this one doesn't have a name. I'm not sure why it doesn't have a name. It says waiting for name. It was saying he ran into an issue with Docker Swarm when trying to pull a private image from Docker Hub. He accidentally added incorrect credentials at first and got image not found, but it was consistent even after updating the credentials. I could pull that image with the same credentials in the cattle and Kubernetes environment on the same Rancher installation. Is the credentials cached somewhere on the nodes? Do you want to answer that question, Darren?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the issue would be there. They aren't cached. I mean, I wonder if you actually just hit a. No, I can't imagine what like the swarm issue would be. I mean, that one I think would probably be best to put in an issue and we can look at it. I'm not quite sure what would have where that could have gotten cached or whatever. And also depends on when you're running Swarm, if you were pulling through the Swarm master or if you're pulling, basically from the Docker, just going directly to like on the host itself.
Okay. I know it looks like we still have a lot of people here, so feel free to keep asking your questions. I know we've been going for a long time, but we're not going anywhere. As long as you've got questions, we'll answer them. But if you leave, feel free, if we ask a question and we don't have a chance to answer it because we just don't get to it, just feel free to shoot the question into our forums, or you can always find Darren and a bunch of our developers on IRC. We're in, hashtag Rancher on Freenode, so you can find us there. Otherwise, Twitter, wherever you'd like, you can hit us up. We'll try to answer your questions there. Okay, the next question. How would you compare this from Jose? How would you compare Rancher against something like Deis? Do you want to answer that question, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, so Deis we kind of view as a layer above Rancher. I mean, so if you're using Rancher, let's say, to deploy Kubernetes, Deis is something that runs on top of Kubernetes. And so, Deis works at kind of that PaaS layer. And so, honestly, I'd love to see Deis, working well on Rancher. I know Deis has in their kind of newer development versions, they have Helm packages for Deis itself. And so if you can, you run Rancher, if you use Rancher to deploy Kubernetes, then Helm can deploy, basically applications to that Kubernetes cluster. And so, it should be able to run. So, again, we look at Deis as being that higher level PaaS layer, and Rancher sitting a little lower than that.
Okay. So this question was from Raphael. He said, "What happens if a worker node running a container dies? Will the container be recreated in another host?"
Yeah. So if you really want, when a node dies, we really rely on health checks on the service to determine whether or not we should spin up a new container. So if the host dies, basically the health checks will fail. In Rancher, you'll see it go into a reconnecting state because from a Rancher perspective, we really don't know if that host is gone or if we just can't talk to it. That's why we really rely on service health checks. That's the most reliable way to know. So it's like if the health check fails, then we know that service, nothing else is talking to it, and then we'll reschedule it. So I've seen people do actually integrations. They'll create like a little component that, like a little component that you can deploy within an environment that will talk to like AWS, and when AWS says it's gone, they delete it out of Rancher to keep those two things in sync. But node failures are really handled through service health checks.
There was a question about, is there any plan to implement Calico IP management into Rancher?
I'm kind of curious what you mean specifically about the IP management part of that. We do have intentions of supporting Calico through Live Network plugin. So we do, like right now, our networking is really quite custom in the 1.0, and we're trying very hard to move our networking into a Live Network and CNI plugin. And then at that point, as soon as we do that, we will then also have support for anything else that supports CNI and Live Network. And so we would very much like to be able to support Calico through Live Network. But that's something we're working on in a future use.
Got it. So Marcin Shakot asked, I've set up Rancher on HTTPS, but it's still available on port 8080 via -P. How can I start it so that 8080 is not being exposed to the outside world and Docker doesn't add it to IP tables?
Well, I mean, so typically if you're going to do, like what we've always recommended people in the past for doing like a simple SSL setup was to run Rancher server without the -P option, and then run a Nginx container next to it. So basically, you don't you link the containers so that they stay on the private Docker bridge, and you don't expose out the Rancher server port. So that's kind of like I believe that's what our documentation right now for SSL actually says to do. I can check on that. But basically, you need to launch the Rancher server without the -P and then run an Nginx container on the same host to do the SSL termination. So our HA setup, that will be in 101, and makes it easier. So even if you don't want to do a 3-node, more complicated setup, you can just do the 1-node setup, and then we'll automatically set up the SSL for you.
So thanks, Darren. There was a question. We're almost getting done now. There was a qualification question on the Calico stuff about the IP management. So what Keith Raj pointed out, he said, if you give a UI management of Calico with Rancher to assign the direct IP, that'd be great. So basically, the point is you could actually directly assign and create specific IPs, I think, or maybe sticky IPs for containers regardless of where they ran. So they would sort of maintain their IP however they got provision. I think that was sort of the point he was trying to make. So anyways, he said he'd love to help give ideas about it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I mean, it sounds like, I mean, we already do that with Rancher today. It's like the containers keep their IPs. Like if you stop and start a container, we don't change the IP. We found that just really causes a lot of problems with applications, especially clustered ones. We even have the ability to, like when we do service failover, you destroy a container and you deploy a new one on another host to keep that IP. There's a feature that's called retain IP within Rancher to keep that IP. This works again for a lot of clustered systems. Let's say like Zookeeper, which they really care about the IP. We use that, and so there's we do have some of that functionality today already built in, and then I would assume as we move, if we support Calico, we could hopefully also be able to support that. But when we talk about supporting like Live Network or CN9 and those things, those frameworks handle IP management themselves or have the capability to handle them themselves. So when we support those, we'll also have the ability to delegate the IPAM, like the IP management portion, to a separate component.
Awesome. Okay, so there's another, it looks like I've got 3 more questions right now. So one question was from Matteo, and he said, do you plan to add language packs like French in the UI?
Yeah, we have a lot of requests for internationalization. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, where it's falling in into our schedule of developing things, because I know we were actually going to do it for 1.0, but it got bumped out. But I assume it's going to come pretty soon that we'll support internationalization.
Yeah, I think the idea of supporting it would be such a great thing in a community project. So we'd love to have people start creating language packs as soon as we can create a framework for them and get the community to support it. I know we have users in literally pretty much every country around the world. I've talked to people in Greenland using Rancher, and in Barbados using Rancher, and in tons of users in Russia, and tons of users in Latin America, and Germany, and Europe. So we'd love to have language packs. I think France is maybe one of the countries Rancher is the most popular in. We've just an enormous user group. There's a Paris Rancher meetup already. So we'd love to have a French language support. Anyone who wants to help with that a little bit too in the community, please file an issue, and let's get started, and we'll make it a priority. So that would be great. So there's a question from, let me see here. The next question is from Shiquang. I hope I'm saying that right. As a few of other questions had asked, but I'm wondering, is Rancher suitable for open public instead of a more contained environments like inside of an enterprise, such as having people come in and use Git drone Rancher for testing out and demonstration of the product, and have full control over their own stuff, but nothing else? If this not a feature now, will this have any slight chance to be adapted in the future? So I think the question here is, could you run a public service of Rancher where individual users could come in, create, and deploy their services, but not other users? So what's the level of multi-tenancy that you might be able to have in a Rancher deployment? I think that's the right question, because it's definitely, your point is right, Shiquang, that the natural state of Rancher is that each company or each team or organization would have their own implementation of Rancher, and that's sort of how it's designed. But the idea of Rancher as a multi-tenant service where you'd run one Rancher and anybody can come in and use it, I know some companies that are already doing this, that are actually taking Rancher and offering Rancher as a service in different markets. So I think it's definitely possible. The potential for doing sort of more isolation within an environment so that users only can see what they've deployed and cannot have any insight is something on the roadmap. So you'll probably see some enhancements and stuff going in that direction. I think the best way to do that right now is to just deploy a Rancher environment for each customer or each user if you're doing sort of a public cloud type service. But get in touch with us. Let us, we can jump on a phone and have a call and chat through it more with you if you're trying to think about launching that.
Yeah, right. I mean, right now, the authentication is kind of like this delegated model. I mean, it's more like an invite model, I guess, because a user goes in and then basically authorizes other users to have access. But we actually do have like a hidden flag to just say something like, hey, just let anyone in with a GitHub account, and they automatically get an environment and start adding things. But it's not the kind of the default behavior. So again, as Shannon said, I would really say, contact us and we can see what the use case is and how we can support it.
Okay, the next question was from Roa Trebek. He said, do you have any recommendations how one would go about setting up a hybrid private/public cloud setup? We have some machines in a private data center and a few VMs on Azure and AWS, which we'd also like to manage with Rancher. So yeah, the short answer here is Rancher actually is kind of ideal for this setup because of two things. One, you can use Rancher to manage those resources independently, in the sense of you could have a cluster of, you could have one environment that was made up of all your hosts in on-premise, and another environment that was made up of all your hosts in Azure, and a third environment that maybe had everything in Amazon, and then you would simply deploy to the environment that you wanted to run in. So imagine running your clusters in each cloud. But Rancher, because we use IPsec-based SDN in the product, we also create a network that can actually go out over the public internet. So the Rancher network by default is encrypted and isolated. So you can actually also create one big cluster where your hosts are made up of some in Amazon, some in Azure, and some on-premise. And then as you deploy services, you could deploy them and use things like tags, like host tags. You might have a set of host tags that say, this is availability zone 1 in Amazon, and this is availability zone 2 in Amazon, and this is availability zone 1 in Azure, and I want to run this service in, any node that's tagged availability zone 1 in Amazon, ideally. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. There's all sorts of ways to do that, but I think that's one of the things that people love about Rancher so much is it really does a great job of letting you run however you like in different infrastructure stacks. Okay, last, I think, question. We've had a few more coming through. The last question was from Jose. This is a good one for you, Darren. This may be an odd question, but what is the limit on the number of containers per host, considering Linux limitations? Any ideas?
Yeah. Yeah. So we've tested this, and so the limitations. I'll tell you what we run into. Like the limitations are largely what your host can survive with Docker. So it's like the more resources you give it, you can actually get like over 1,000 containers on a host. But I'll tell you the one problem we run into is cAdvisor. And so if you're planning on running a huge amount of containers on a host, is you really need to back off the cAdvisor interval. Because I think we deploy it with the default right now, which is like 1 second, which is really far too aggressive for a massive amount of containers. So if you back that off to like a minute or 5 minutes, then you can get up to like, let's say 1,000 containers or whatnot. But right now for most deployments, we're really recommending people to stay below 200. But if you're in like the engineering effort of actually like tuning and tweaking your machine, you can get past 1,000. We don't have in terms of from a Rancher perspective, our scaling limitations are really about right now, like our kind of our bottleneck right now is the number of containers per environment largely. So if you have like 1,000 containers on one host or 1,000 containers across 50 hosts, it doesn't really make a difference to us. So if scaling up one host really large is really just tuning that one host.
Okay, there's another question from Shikang. He asked, does Rancher itself support plugins to enhance features that Rancher does not natively provide? Also, is the API fully integrated? So, do you want to talk about plugins and APIs, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, like the direction of so the thing is like our networking and our load balancing and our DNS today kind of come as an integrated component in Rancher, but what we're doing now is we're actually pushing those out to more of like plugins to the system, because it's largely how they're written now. But now that we have Rancher metadata, we can actually use Rancher metadata to drive a lot more functionality. And so the thing is the direction of Rancher going forward is really like to keep the core of it smaller, and deploy things more through like system stacks. And so you can really enhance the functionality of Rancher quite a bit just through deploying stacks. There's this one feature that we don't a lot of people are using, but we haven't really documented it very well. Is that basically you can assign credentials to containers as they get deployed. So you can have a container act as the privileges of like the environment, and so it can then interact with the environment and do a lot of interesting things. So like that's actually how let's say the Let's Encrypt catalog entry works. So we don't have native support for Let's Encrypt, but the community has basically figured out how to deploy a service within your environment, which then interacts with Let's Encrypt and then refreshes the certificate and posts it back to Rancher. And so it keeps updating the certificate in Rancher, and then we use that as the SSL certificate in the load balancer. So what we're seeing is you can really add a lot of functionality just through deploying these kind of intelligent stacks that are talking to our API or just to our metadata. You can do quite a bit with it.
Awesome. All right. Last question was from Renaud. He said, will there be the ability to customize the look and feel of the UI for an organization using a custom logo, theme, etc.? How would you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one you should really contact us directly. We already do this for other customers who wanted to, kind of like white label it and or whatnot. I don't know if we like really support that very well from the open source perspective. So I think I would really say contact us directly on that one.
Okay, and with that, I will. I think we are all wrapped up. This was great. I didn't mean to kind of show this. If you want to kind of try to figure out how to work all this with CI/CD, we've got a new ebook on our website that's really good. It's written by one of our a big user, and he wrote how to run your CI/CD process with Rancher. You can pull that up. You can see the URL, but you can also just find it on our homepage now. Otherwise, I want to thank Don and Srdjan. I'm hoping they probably dropped. We've had so many questions, but if you're still around, guys, thanks a lot for participating and helping. It was great having you speak.
We're still here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then Darren, it was great as always having you on and demoing and talking. Thank you for participating, and we will we'll let you guys all go with that, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.